All right, so we're live. So hello everybody, welcome to another onos TSP meeting. We haven't had one in a while. This is a public and recorded meeting, so keep that in mind. And today we have a fairly packed agenda. It's going to comprise mostly of onos or micro onos updates. There's also some onos updates as well. And then Zack wants to discuss the module owner plugin for Gerrit and associated changes. So with that in mind, let's start just going from the top. First, Andrea and Jordan are going to provide update on onos-config distributed stores. Go ahead, take it, guys. Who wants the permissions to share?
So I talked about them. I talked about the architecture of the stores last time, so I don't know if I need to show anything this time. But
Okay.
the update is we've finished that implementation. So I think it was the last TST meeting that I went through basically the whole architecture of the store and things like that, or maybe a couple of meetings ago. But basically, we finished all of it. It's stable. We're now working on integration tests for HA tests and things like that, and scale tests. And so we're going to try to move towards just making sure that it's really stable for all the things that we need and that it performs well. And so hopefully in a little while we'll have benchmarks and things set up, and we can talk about the performance of it. That's basically it.
Okay, that's great. So Sean, do you want to talk about the onos UI and changes there? Sean? Oh, he's not online via audio.
So maybe we can switch the topics around.
Tom? Yeah, let's switch topics around. So Jordan, while you have the mic, do you want to talk about the new onos API, onos test APIs?
Yep. Yeah. So I'll share my screen then. Okay, yeah. So as I mentioned, as we're working on testing the distributed stores, I started, as part of that work, I started doing more work on onit. So one of the limitations of onit was that it runs on basically the cluster that you give it. So basically, you like the current implementation of onit, the test framework. You set up a cluster, you have a test image, and you run the test on whatever cluster you give it. And this creates problems for tests that we want to run on different cluster configurations. In the case of HA, we need the test to be able to modify the cluster, like kill nodes, perhaps scale services and things like that. And the other issue that we had was that it just wasn't, it runs all the tests sequentially. And so as we add more and more tests, it's gonna just take longer and longer to run them. And so we wanted to parallelize them. And so I started working on just some of these improvements for onit, and this is what came out of it. So basically the first thing is that let me make these. So the first thing that I started working on was parallelizing tests. And so I modified the actual deployment, how multiple tests run in different namespaces on different clusters inside Kubernetes. And so it looks like this. So like when you run onit test now, you can give it several suites to run, and it'll run each suite inside a different namespace. So it has a new kube test namespace, which is just a namespace that jobs run in that manage the tests. And so when you run some suites, it will deploy a job inside the kube test namespace. The kube test namespace will figure out which suites it can parallelize, and then it creates a namespace for each of the test suites, deploys the job inside that namespace, or inside each namespace, and the job is the test suite that will run. And so inside the job, now we have an API which can set up the cluster however it wants. It can create, an HA test can create 2 topo nodes so that it can kill one, and a scale test can create a cluster with more raft partitions or whatever, or an application, or say the ZTP, we could add ZTP tests that deploys the ZTP app that other tests don't need to use. And so the tests can deploy whatever they want and run whatever tests they want, and now tests are parallelized and things like that. So in order to do this test setup, there's a new API. And by the way, this stuff is all in the 2.0 branch. So I added a 2.0 branch in the onos test repo, which I'll show. So this is sort of what the API looks like. So we added a test suite abstraction. So inside a test suite, there you can add a setup method. And inside the setup method, you can set up all the services for µONOS. So this is setting up three 3-node partitions, setting up the top of service with 2 nodes, setting up the config service with 1 node. And I'll show you some of the tests as well. You can add applications to the cluster, like you could write ZTP tests that add the ZTP app. You can kill nodes inside an application or any other service, which is important for HA. And I think over time I'll add network partition methods and things like that also. You can add simulators programmatically, which is one of the most common use cases. Like currently, in the current version of onit, you basically have to add it before you run a test that expects device simulators. You have to manually add device simulators. So now you can programmatically add them, and the test, if it needs to use 2 device simulators, can just add 2 device simulators and then remove them when it's done. And this also works for benchmarks. So this is the benchmark API. Looks very similar to the test API, but there's just a different interface to implement. And so you can set up a benchmark suite, and this just uses the Go benchmark library. And so you run it just like a test, and except you use the testing.b interface, and you can use that to run a benchmark just like you would in any other Go program, except this one is run inside Kubernetes. So let me show you the code real quick. Yeah, so there's this 2.0 branch inside onos test now. And just for all the tests that we have had currently, or had before I started working on this, I ported over to the new API. And so you can go through them and see what they look like. And basically, the tests are grouped by subsystem sort of. So if you go in like config, there's this suites file. In suites, it'll show you all the different test suites that we have. So there's a smoke test suite, CLI test suite, HA test suite. And each test suite on it can run in parallel. And so it'll create a namespace for each of these test suites and run the tests within them. And then you can see that each suite is setting up the cluster however it wants. And then if you go in like the single path tests, make this a little bigger. You can see that this one is, for example, adding a simulator. So all the GNMI tests add and then there are, so I'm just starting to work on HA tests, but there are like atomics HA tests, which show like this test like queries the API to find a node in each of the partitions and kill the node. Yeah, so this is killing it. So yeah, that's basically it. I still have to work on, or actually, no, I did do documentation. Yeah, so there is documentation for all the new commands in here. So there is a getting started page, information about basically all the different, basically what I just talked about. But most importantly, there's this testing API. So in this testing documentation, it talks about all the features of the test API. And that's about it. Yeah. So that's the new API. So I'm hoping to, the cool thing about this is we can also, it's also set up so you just give it an arbitrary image of test to run. Previously, all of our tests for all of the subsystems were inside the onos test repo. And there was only one image that it was capable of running, but now we can start moving the tests into, say, like the onos-config test can be inside the onos-config repo, and the onos-topo test can be in the onos-topo repo. And so I started working on that also. So there's a pull request open in onos-config that moves all of the onos-config tests into the onos-config repo so that when we make changes on onos-config, people can add integration tests for them now also. So I'm working towards that, and so hopefully soon we'll have all of the tests in their proper repositories. And yeah, then we'll start adding HA tests and benchmarks. So that's it.
This is great, Jordan. It's awesome. Very cool. So Sean, are you online now? Can you hear us?
Hopefully you can hear me now, Thomas.
Yes, we can. So I'm going to make you a presenter, and we can go to the second bullet, which is the onos-gui.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see here. Okay, so hopefully you can see my desktop.
Yes.
Yeah. So so what I have my cluster set up here, and I've made a few config changes to it, and I'm just going to bring up the GUI, and yeah. There was a slide I had as well. Let me just get the slide. I can get access. So yeah, so what I've done is I've added on a new view called the configuration dashboard, and it's something that takes advantage of the structure that's there now in onos-config. So I flagged this before through a slide pack that I did a good while back, but basically it's a tabular layout that's got the list of devices across the bottom, and this can expand dynamically as the number of devices grow. And up the vertical axis, you've got the network changes. So it's kind of symbolic of what's going on with each network change. Working from the bottom up, you've got the snapshot, which is basically a consolidated configuration for each one of the devices. And as new network changes are added, they're added on top of each other. So this is like the history of the configuration changes. As you can see now, every configuration change applies to every device. What I've got to add in here are controls to compact the changes, and this will reduce all of these changes from all of its history down into a snapshot view. And when you're making a snapshot, there is a possibility of giving a retention time. So you shot up until, we'll say this time yesterday, 24 hours ago. And so it will leave all the network changes that have happened since then as individual network changes, and anything prior to that will be consolidated and flattened down. So in the view here, just to give a quick summary of it, so it's driven by live updates through onos-config. It's, like I said, the network changes on the vertical devices, and the horizontal snapshots, and it's got links to the configuration view. So each one of these links will bring us through to the config view, which is what I showed at ONF Connect. And it's possible then to drill down on details by tool tips and so on. And what these are showing here are counts of changes that happened within a network change. And the status of each one of those is given by color as well. So while this is showing blue here, that's the color for success. I tried to keep the color palette from the onos traditional GUI. But if anything goes wrong, these light up in red here. Now there's some features that I still have to add, and one of them is filtering of these list of devices and also sorting. So for instance, it might be possible to filter on devices that are disconnected or maybe have failed changes on them, or else it might be able to sort them by number of changes or by the most recent change and so on, like this. So in one view it's possible to see the complete configuration status and update of the system. Scrolling is another thing, obviously, we want to take care of, so that as the number of devices, I think we're planning on up to 50 devices, and there could be hundreds of network changes, and so the idea is that this column here would stay frozen, and the bottom row would stay frozen, and you'll be able to scroll within it to view all of your network changes. So I was just going to I have a demo going. Let me just switch over to it. So I think it should be possible to see it here. So basically, I have my system set up with I've made 3 changes on 2 devices here, and I can click on this and go into this view that I had previously, and it's showing those network changes relative to that device, and you can go through their history and turn them on and off as you wish. So I've simplified the menu. We've just got a dashboard now, and that brings you back to this view. So what I was going to do is just make a change to it here. So I'm just going to quickly borrow just the configuration from here, and going to paste it in here. I should have kept the view, but basically, the fourth one is there now. I was just going to make one more, which is a change to 2 devices, and I'll make sure my GUI is visible this time. There's some glitch there at the moment. This being a demo, there's always going to be a glitch, but there's something that's stopping showing the second update here. But it's something that I can fix. What I was going to show as well is just a quick. Those people that know the documentation system here will know this page on. Let me just navigate to it. I want to make it clear. Northbound GNMI service, and there's a tab here for unknown devices. So if you wanted to create a new device or a device that's not a config only device that's not already known to the system, you have GNMI there that you can specify extensions to define the type and the value and everything like this. I'm just going to copy that one there, go back to my GUI and paste it, and my new device pops up. Now, the device isn't colored because it's a config only device, and when I hover over it, I don't get a tooltip telling me its status, whereas these ones are real connected devices, and I can see the status of the device here. It's through GNMI, it's connected, and it's reachable. When this device does connect, say it's a real device, when it does connect, an init synchronization will take place with it, and it will push that configuration down to the device when it connects. Just to finish up, just to give some small details on this, if I click on this one, it gives me the list of changes that happened You know, so I have all that detail there. And if I hover over this one, it's showing me the status of the network change. So basically, you know, it went through all the stages of, you know, pending, running, complete, and basically ended up in the status where it's complete. I could also run the integration tests here. I don't know if I have them here in the history, but basically it'll be as simple as just should be possible to, yeah, this one. So this is the integration test. Fingers crossed it's going to run to completion. Some of the changes I have made might cause us to have problems, but basically it's a good example of it didn't work out well. Yeah, it gives some good examples of what are all the network changes that happened here, and shows a rollback, and also, you know, some cases where values were removed from the configuration. It's showing a strike through as well. So basically, if anyone, you know, perfectly happy to get people's feedback on this, and if you know, if people feel there's other features that need to be included in it, or you know, have comments on the coloring scheme or the layout or the workings of it, you know, please feel free to share your thoughts either now or afterwards on it.
This is excellent.
I think that's probably it, Thomas.
This is great.
Very good. Thanks. Anyone?
Are there any
Yeah, I think
from the audience here?
no. I just think it's amazing. It like I said before. This is exactly how I pictured this information before. So I think it's really useful. Good job.
Agreed.
Good. Thanks, Gordon.
Agreed. This is huge potential. All right. So
good.
Anybody else, or before we move on? If not, then why don't we pass the buck to Andrea, who can walk us through some of the Helm chart changes?
Yes. Allow me to present the screen. Just hold on for 1 second. Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
I do not yet. There we go. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So thanks, Thomas. So what we did in the past few weeks was also putting together a set of Helm charts for 3 base services that we have at the moment, meaning config, topology, and CLI. There are a few more that need the revamping of the Helm charts. Simulator is definitely one that I need to tackle next. But what we can do at the moment is deploy through Helm charts these 3 services on a cluster. So just let me show you that. What I have here is a cluster started with kind. Very simple one, just kind create cluster. This is what you get. Then to deploy µONOS, what you need to start with is an atomics controller. Jordan can go in a lot more depth than what I can here, but this basically is the entry point for atomics to be capable of managing partitions and connection to partitions. So what this does, creates the service, the atomics controller. It puts it in deployment and it creates also a service account. And if you can look here, it does create so in the default namespace, and it has the usual liveliness and readiness probes, and it's now currently up and running. Then after you have done our services through Helm charts. So in here, what I'm doing is that I'm deploying the onos-topo Helm chart. And what this does, it creates the onos-topo service, but it also creates a partition set for onos-topo. In this case, it's going to be just 1 because I'm deploying locally. I don't want too many partitions for just onos-topo. But And it's all done automatically through the Helm chart. So, and this deploys it in the default namespace. And it again, if we watch the pods, you can see here that it creates this graph partition set. And it also creates the onos-topo contain pod, basically. So this might take a little bit just to get up and running, because what happens is that first the onos-topo graph partition will start and connect to the atomics controller, and then after that also the onos-topo service will recognize the fact that it now has the partitions that it needs and then become ready. The liveness and readiness probe of onos-topo are basically the capability of opening up the gRPC service on the 5150. Same thing happens with config. So here I have an installation of the onos-config Helm chart, and it does the same thing. It deploys the onos-config pod, and it deploys the pod for the rough partition set. Again, same thing, deploys it, and yet again, you see here onos-config, which is in container creating, which is the highlighted one, and the onos-config graph partition set that is now running, and also now onos-config gets up and running. The last one that we have is the CLI. Just to spice it up a little bit, not to make it boring for everybody, I've added the debug flag here just to show you how this prints a lot more information on what exactly the chart is doing. And this shows you exactly what are you deploying in a much deeper information. It has much more information that can help you in the, debug if there is a problem. So this same thing, what it does, fairly simple, creates the container here. There's no need for the atomics pod, for the atomics graph partition set in case of CLI. So it just creates it, runs it, and there you go. So then what you have to do for accessing the CLI, just to show you that, is that I'm going to do it through kubectl. So let's pick, for example, this one, the CLI here. So what I'm going to do is kubectl on the default namespace. Then I'm going to get the name of the pod, which is onos-cli here, paste it here, and then I'm going to access the shell. And here I can do the old same onos-cli commands, such as onos-topo get devices. There's going to be no device because I have not pushed it yet. This is something that we're going to work on. Or onos-config get the network changes, for example. There's no change because, again, there's nothing that we have put in there yet. You can also delete a certain Helm charts very easily with Helm delete. In this case, it's going to be onos-topo, and that's gone. So it's just terminating, and it removes both the service and the partition set. So this is the initial step that we're going to do for the Helm charts. If anybody is interested, there is documentation for all of this in under the docs here. And if you're going to go into, for example, the configuration subsystem, you're going to find a page called How to Deploy with Helm. And this just showcases you how to deploy the onos-config with Helm. There's also an umbrella page that shows you how to get started and how to deploy the atomics controller the way I've shown it, and how to deploy. Then it goes and then deploys each of the service. So you can find it for the topology subsystem also, how to deploy with Helm, same thing here. One of the next steps that I'm going to tackle. So there's a one caveat at the moment with the deployment, that is that the current deployment works for the default namespace, but requires an atomics controller per each namespace you're going to deploy in, and also route partitions per each namespace that you're going to deploy in. So I'm working with Jordan to sort that out and understand what is the proper way of deploying that atomics controller, and make sure that it works not just in the default namespace, but in other namespaces too. So that's one. And the other is to get the simulator Helm chart, which is there, ported to Helm 3, because this is Helm 3, and if you notice, a very interesting thing is that it does not require Tiller to be there, which is kind of important for us, and because it's one less hassle, and it avoids the security issues that Tiller had in the past. And so those two elements are the one that we're going to work on. The simulator Helm chart and the getting them deployed in different namespaces. A third one is actually running tests on these and putting them in as part of integration tests for a patch, meaning that what we're going to do is that we're going to not only deploy onit and test with onit, but also deploy a cluster with Helm charts and run a couple of tests, not all of them, but just to make sure that the cluster is up and running with the Helm charts too. Any questions?
Oh, this is great.
And the idea behind this, sorry, Thomas, and the idea, something I forgot to mention, the idea behind this is that our release of a service is going to be our release of its Helm chart.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, as far as releases, I think our expectation is that different services will have different versions. I'm wondering if we're going to want to have a Helm chart that sort of, Helm supports dependencies. Are we going to have a Helm chart that is the micro onos Helm chart that's version for a micro onos release? I mean, people can use the individual Helm charts if they want, but I'm wondering if we want just a full system Helm chart that has a version for whatever we're calling a release, and where we should put that, and if we should worry about that now.
My assumption was that yes, we would want to have that. Basically, that overall Helm chart would just be basically the set of versions which have been QA'd together and validated to work with each other.
Yes. Okay.
And to answer your second kind of follow-up question of whether we should worry about it now, I think it would be good to put that together once you guys work out the issues with deploying in non-default namespaces, and also once we kind of work out sort of the cascading dependencies, like for example the topo versus the config. Right, because and that kind of ties into the next bullet that we want to talk about, which is the onos-config being feature complete. I think as part of that, it would be kind of nice to be able to have a kind of a first, at least maybe pre 1.0 release of onos-config together with those Helm charts and with skeletal onos-topo and the existing atomics.
Yep. Yeah. So if we're going to do that. Do the sort of µONOS release part, I think we're also going to have to solve the dependency issue. So, I mean, I haven't looked at Helm 3 very much, but in Helm 2, at least, you had to sort of deploy the Helm chart in a remote repository for dependencies. So we're probably going to have to find somewhere to host the Helm charts also, unless they added GitHub integration or something. But yeah, I mean, we can look into that.
Right. I don't think it's strictly necessary, at least not for the initial release, but I think down the line, you definitely want to do that. But I think for the kind of the first onos-config pre 1.0 release, which we're looking at the end of the year, effectively, it would be nice to have it, but we don't necessarily need to have it there, right, for that.
Over in Cord, we have a Helm chart publishing workflow if you want to swipe it or discuss how it works.
Definitely. I think the more we kind of integrate the way Cord does things with the way µONOS does things, the better, right? I mean, um, the whole point is to make it as seamless as possible, because we want onos to be blending into the Cord ecosystem as smoothly as possible. So
Sure, ping me whenever, and we can go over that.
Yep, sounds good. Andrea, while you have the sharing, do you want to take us to the next next bullet point, which is the feature completion?
Yes. So this is a bullet point that we discussed having the µONOS team discussed having, and the idea is that by looking at the current state of onos-config, we believe there's not that much left to be calling it feature complete. When I say feature complete, it does really mean that we don't see any major missing element in terms of functionality for it to be ready in terms of functionality. That doesn't say that it's been tested at scale, it is production ready. It does not mean that. It means that we can actually start thinking at doing those performance testing, HA testing, and production assessments, because we do not expect any major component of the code to be added or to be changed in the upcoming future. So we created a milestone for that under onos-config that includes what we think are the things that need to be addressed for that to be ready. There's a few of them. Especially there's a few bugs. And another one on the get during device connection, and that is regarding basically having a mode to interact with the device during its first encounter with onos-config. There's lack of support for wildcard paths in the set response from the device. That's currently not there in onos-config. We do not at the moment enable northbound subscribers to define the subscription on change sample and target defined for the device itself. We just subscribe on the target defined at the moment. This is something. And a minor one is that we currently hard code the onos-topo address as a parameter in the onos-topo in the device store, basically. So that will have to change. But we think that these are the things that to call the onos-config service. Bear in mind, not everything not the GUI that Sean showed, or not the CLI that I have, or not even the topo service. Just the config service, to call it feature complete. These are the things that are missing, and we're going to strive to make these happen by January 1st. So the idea is to have, for January 1st, 2020, a feature complete image of onos-config that includes all of these elements, and that is versioned with an Helm chart, and we just release it as we discussed.
Yeah.
Does that sum it up right, Thomas?
Yep, no, that's exactly right. One thing that, and this is my bad, I forgot to add another issue to this as a stretch. One of the stretch goals is also to create an onos classic application which would effectively provide the onos-topo gRPC services in lieu of the onos-topo from µONOS. This would provide an integration of onos-config with onos classic, where the onos-config can learn about the device inventory changes from onos classic.
And if we get that, it would be nice to actually have the overarching Helm chart.
Right. And I think there's going to be some more work to
µONOS, one that deploys.
Go ahead, Andrea, sorry.
And one that deploys onos-config probably onos-cli with the micro-onos-cli, and also the onos classic for it to serve as topology and control.
Correct. Yeah. So performance-wise, we're not too worried with the rate of the rate of operations that we need to sustain. It's several orders of magnitude of what the mechanisms can accomplish. So we're not really worried about that. As far as the scale goes, there will clearly need to be some optimizations and some additional tests to be able to meet the desired objectives of number of devices, number of ports, and combined with the number of operations that we need to sustain per day. But functionally, we should be pretty close. So I think that's that. Unless there's any comments or questions on this, we can give the mic to Zack. No question. No questions. All right, Zack, I'm making you a presenter.
Okay, great.
All right, we can see.
Okay, so in the infrastructure meeting, it came up that we needed to update. We're trying to update all the services that we host and run. One of those is Gerrit for the legacy onos. So in that, we're using this module owners plugin, which Brian wrote a while ago. But because it changes inside Gerrit, upgrading and using that with newer versions of using that plugin with newer versions of Gerrit doesn't work because of changes to the structure and database. So that's been end of life for better like half a year, including the next version past the version that we can upgrade to. So the goal, and so that's the problem. We want to upgrade Gerrit and we are unable to because of this plugin if the onos team is still relying on it. So I proposed 3 solutions, or we came up with 3 proposed solutions in the infrastructure meeting yesterday. One is to update and maintain the existing module owner plugin. So somebody would need to come and take long-term ownership and responsibility for updating that. A while ago, I made a list of some of the code level changes. So Gerrit internals database changed to a new NoteDB. Additionally, there's some Prolog predicates in Gerrit that would need to be changed over that no longer exist. I linked to the change that removed them and some other discussion. The general goal is to get this to work on the Gerrit 3.x code base. Another option would be to switch to a different externally maintained ownership plugin. So there is a find owners plugin. This is kind of confusingly named. There's both an owners plugin and a find owners plugin. I believe the owners plugin adds a bunch of Prolog stuff to Gerrit, but find owners actually provides a UI to that and does some other file parsing. So switching to this would be one option. The onos team would need to populate the owners file. These files would be dropped through the code base. An example of what one of those looks like is from Chromium. This says in the build folder, these people are allowed to make changes. They're per file changes. There's some other notes and other stuff in there. And the existing module owners config file, when I log in, it has similar paths. In these paths, you need to make owners files, and then and that would be used by Gerrit to set the owners on those, or who would be allowed to review and approve those patches. So that maintains eliminate the ownership system altogether because development has transitioned to micro onos. It may be simpler to just get rid of it and not replace it and use all the standard code review methods and other reviewer plugins. So we were kind of motivated to get this upgrade done in the near term. So I wanted to bring that to the onos-TST to see what your thoughts are and which of these proposed solutions seems most attractive, or if there are other ones that we could pursue. We're open to that as well.
Hey, Zach, thanks for giving us all the data here. I think I am all for the easiest solution. And the reason I like that is A, because it's the easiest solution. And B, just the change stream going into Onos right now is fairly small. And so my suggestion would be, if we were to do that, we would remove +2 ability from basically most people other than just a few within ONF. The people who were module owners can still do the reviews, and they can recommend things, they can't commit them. I'm curious what other people think about that. In the past, making somebody a module owner was also sort of a community event. We would announce it. It was kind of something we looked forward to. So I don't want to kill it necessarily for that reason, but I'm curious what everybody else thinks.
Well, I think I'm perfectly okay with that, except with a slight variation. I think there are certain module owners outside of ONF that I would definitely entrust to continue to make +2 and merge changes. And we can,
I would
not all of them, but for many. And so I think we could go through the list collectively and then figure out how we would like to split it up, right? So basically what we would be looking at is the list of module owners and deciding who kind of stays in the group capable of making +2 merge and who needs to go out, and then there would have to be like a surrogate delegate.
Yeah, so you raise a good point, Thomas. So somebody like Gian, I think, as an example, is someone who I would be totally confident giving +2 ability to the whole source tree. Correct. In the past, we gave people +2 to individual apps they were working on, and those are the people I don't want to give carte blanche +2. Just not because I think people are going to do anything malicious. I just don't want people messing up, say, the core Gerrit build files, Bazel build files, for example.
Sure, understood.
So, Zach, if we were to do that, I mean, obviously, the only thing you guys would be on the hook for then is the upgrade. Is that the case?
That's correct. So what I'm hearing is number 3 seems like the most attractive change.
It certainly is from my perspective. I don't know if anybody else has any input. It seems like the other one I'd like to hear from, if you're on the call, is Carmelo, because Carmelo is actually doing the most changes to the core Onos these days.
Oh, Pierre is here also.
Yeah, I guess Pierre and myself are submitting a lot of changes.
Yeah.
I think going with option 3 will not prevent eventually integrating option 2 as well. If one day we need to give permissions to a given subtree.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good perspective too.
So I mean, if you go to option 3, I guess we will have to decide to essentially remove permissions to some module owner that today can merge code into a given subtree. I don't know if we want to communicate that to them, or
so
there's this annoying aspect of removing permissions to people.
Right, I agree that this will have to be very clearly communicated, and we'll have to at least make a progression of announcements and well declared timeline for making this change. It doesn't have to be long. It just has to be
Yeah, I think we could. I'm wondering too if we can, I don't know, use a mailing list or something where people who have +2 ability now can get a hold of someone to be able to do the final review and merge, so things don't.
Sure, we can do that.
Just have a procedure for people to be able to have things reviewed.
Yeah, maybe like
so Ray, that's one of the secondary.
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, no. So what I was going to say was the first part of the module owners plugin was actually giving people the actual permission to +2 code. The other part was we had a problem at one point. I don't know if it still is a problem, where we had just a flurry of commits coming into all parts of the code base, and someone who was committing code didn't necessarily know who should be assigned to it. Reviewers by blame wasn't really working because people that were getting blamed were no longer on the project. And so module owners kind of gave us a way to assign a reviewer who had ability to commit to +2 code to code reviews that were coming into parts of the code base. Now, if the stream is small enough that the current maintainers can kind of keep an eye on all of the outstanding changes, then that may no longer be an issue. But if that's still something that may be still something to consider.
Okay. From what I've seen, I think the number of changes not coming from ONF is tiny. I don't know, Carmelo, Pierre, what do you guys think about that? I know Charles deals with some 112 stuff that comes in from the Comcast folks.
Change that we
it seems to me like it's.
Sorry, right. I would say, I mean,
no, go ahead.
All the changes that we are doing start from 1.12, but then we backport to 13, 15. I mean, for the long-term support branch and the master. So in any case, we are committing in all the branches.
Right, and you know when these are coming in, right? The Comcast people will tell you.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah, okay.
So I like the suggestion of setting up a maybe separate mailing list for and putting people who have the +2 merge capability, and call it something like onos-maintainers or something like that. And that could be used as a way to bump up, attention to some issues which perhaps slip the maintainer's attention.
Zack, do you know, is there a way we could tell Gerrit? Sorry, Thomas. Is there a way we could tell Gerrit to basically include some fictitious user that has this email list as its email address on all reviews?
It's possible to. So one of the things we had to do in Cord was there's a reviewers section on the project that you can set a regex that's a file path, and we'll add that reviewer whenever the regex matches. So this might be a way to do, I think, what Brian was describing earlier about setting specific sections of the code automatically get reviewers that isn't reviewers by blame.
Okay.
I think that is precisely what the tool was doing. It was, among other things, there was a pattern where we would match on that pattern and just assign the review. So among other metrics, but I think that the set of patches is small enough that we can do it at the moment with that reviewers regex that you were mentioning, and that not be a problem. I have some contributions coming in for DTN but I'm mostly assigned to it. I tell everybody just put me in if I'm not in already. And I think that is also something that we could go ahead and do in the future. Just basically ask people to put somebody that is responsible for a certain project, because if they're contributing, they most likely know who's going to be responsible for that contribution.
Well, but sometimes we get also bug fixing for external people. So I believe having a mailing list where basically people can ask, adopt this review, help me to get in. I mean, I think it is important to have.
Right.
I was not suggesting not to have the mailing list. I was suggesting to have both.
Okay.
Meaning the mailing list.
One other comment on a mailing list. I think one of the issues with a mailing list is that for me at least, when I'm on mailing lists that have constant streams of data, I just filter them out because it's not controlled anymore.
Completely agree.
So I think which like a simple cron job or something that runs and looks at patches that have been sitting for like a super long period of time or have no responses or something or no reviews, and just kind of nudges a mailing list that says either go in here and -1 it or -2 it, abandon it, or do something with it. But I think if it's every patch every time, it's going to get very noisy very quickly, and no one's going to pay attention to it.
I completely agree. I don't think we should feed content to it programmatically. I think it should be there just simply for others to, if they need to have their review get attention. For example, if it didn't get attention for a couple of days, they can use that to increase visibility.
Okay, that's fine with me. Zach, what would your time frame be for doing this upgrade?
So we kind of want to finish up the crowd unification, which we hope to do by the end of this year, and then move to do the Gerrit upgrade in early 2020.
Okay, that's great. Actually, I was going to ask to not do it around the time that we were going to release 2.3, to reduce the entropy of the universe.
Right.
So let's just coordinate on when we're going to do the release, and then if you do it right after we do the release and things are broken for a bit, it's not a big deal.
Okay, that sounds fine. There are a few other changes in Gerrit that people would need to be able to roll with too, which so drafts go away after 2.14 or 2.15. It's replaced with work in progress patches, which work almost exactly the same, and the UI is dramatically upgraded.
Okay.
They replaced it with the new UI. You can see if you go to this new polygerrit UI, which
I particularly don't like, but it's okay.
So it has some nice features. It'll do graphical diff. It'll show you images. It has a few other nice little features like that. I like it more, but I think that's a personal thing. So
yeah.
Okay, so let's.
Andrea,
I'm not
just
sure if you guys need to vote or whatever on this.
So why don't we? I'm gonna hook up. I'm gonna touch base with you offline, and I'll draft up an email for announcing this, at least that it's coming, and so people can start planning for it. And we can probably send it out. Let's plan on sending it out. Let's say beginning part of next week. Is that all right?
That sounds great.
Okay. I think we're a little bit past over time, and so respecting people's time and other meetings, we should probably wrap up then. So thanks everybody for packing the nice.
Could I just add one small item to the agenda? I added it to the slide pack just there.
Sure. I didn't see. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about running over time, but I wrote a proposal on a tutorial for micro-onos, just a kind of a sketch of what the structure might be like. I can share it quickly there. Just,
yep. Go for
it. Give me 1 second. Hopefully you can see my screen. Maybe not yet. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. So I shared the link to us in the slide pack, but what I was proposing is to kind of have it in 2 parts, and the first part would be about deploying it and making configuration changes. Getting familiar with GNMI, CLI, connecting to a stratum, looking at the configurations and so on like this. So this could be something that we could give in a workshop, similar to like the next gen SDN workshop is given at ONF Connect. It mightn't be quite as long, but the idea is to cover most of the operations in there, such as GNMI, CLI, and working with the GUI, working with of compacting changes and network changes and all of this kind of thing. And then the second part would be an extension onto that. That would be, getting people to look at the documentation and how to access it through the API and get familiar with that, and develop their own model plugin and load it and do some configuration, based on their own model plugin with their own Yang files and that kind of thing. So I think it's probably a thing we'll do once we've reached the feature complete point. So it's probably something that we would do in January and February once everything is fully in place, such as the CLI is finalized and the GUI and all of the Helm charts and everything like that for deploying. So I don't know if anyone has any comments. Please feel free to make comments on the document. If you think it needs to be slimmed down or I'm missing something, please just make any comments you want.
This is great. That's a good idea. Thanks, Sean.
Okay.
All right. So for those in the US, have a great holiday next 2 days. We'll see you next week. I'll be posting this video online shortly. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right.
Okay, have a great Thanksgiving,
Bye,
guys.
everybody. Happy Thanksgiving.